great to see so many people here. My name is Denise Baker. I'm one of the members of the turf management working group. We've been working for several months now trying to come up with some ideas and solutions for the treatment of the turf in the common areas of Kentlands. And I want to introduce Amy Portal, who's a member. Eileen Schlichten is here. Judy Korwabek there. There's Karen in the back is another member, and Larry's here in the front, and Roger Ford. So the six of us, and Randy has been also a member of our group. Been a huge help. So what we have done is explored several different options, and we're going to write up some documentation. You're going to know more of the details later. The purpose of tonight is to share with our neighbors and the title holders and people in the neighborhood some of the things that we learned from Chuck Schuster. So Chuck is our guest this evening. He is a turf and landscape expert from the University of Maryland, from the Maryland Extension. If you go to the county fair or the state fair, you probably have seen Chuck in some of the booths. He does a lot of outreach to the community. He also consults with other neighborhood associations on their turf management and land management issues. He came and met with us maybe a month, 6 weeks ago.
About that.
And walked the neighborhood. And so looked at the conditions we have. And we learned a lot from him about the fact that it's not all one piece of grass. We've got a lot of different things going on. And we learned so much that we thought we wanted to share that. So the purpose of tonight, we don't have final recommendations. This is not a decision-making meeting, but it's more of an education of what are some of the things that we have been considering and need to be considering as we go forward and come up with this new plan for how we're going to manage our turf. So I just kind of want to lay that as groundwork. Does anybody else on the committee want to add anything? Randy? Okay, Chuck, I will turn it over to you, and you will take some questions when we're done. You want them to hold their questions?
No, if you have questions, ask them as we go. Well, good evening. I'm Chuck Schuster. I'm an extension educator with the University of Maryland, and basically I'm a faculty member there. My role is to educate in the community. I am one of only a very few commercial horticulture educators for the state. My office is right here in Montgomery County. I'm part of the Central Maryland cluster. But really, there's only 3 of us that handle horticulture across the state of Maryland. So I do a lot of this, and I have worked with HOAs and neighborhood associations for quite a number of years as they look at how they can go green, how they can try to fit into the ever-changing need of looking at quality turf, protecting our kids, our pets, and fitting in environmentally, and that's all part of what we want to look at. Now, the Kentlands is a very, very nice site. We walked it several weeks ago, and one of the first things that you'll notice is you don't have a solution that is going to fit here, that's going to fit there, and it's going to fit there. Your turf varies. You have different soils. Soils, there's 3 big factors that are going to affect the quality of your turf. The quality of your soil. Now, the Kentlands is a manufactured site. At some point in time, the bulldozers came in here and they moved a lot of soil around. So you can't go to the soil survey, Web Soil Survey, U.S. Geologic Survey, and get the data that is really true for the soil. So we have to look at soil tests and things like that and get a better idea. Some of your good topsoil was literally carved up and hauled away and probably sold. In other cases, they brought fill in to give you the topography that you see today. So we look at the quality of the soil. That will include the fertilizer, the nutrients that are in the soil. We will also look at pH and discuss pH, because pH is a key player in high-quality turf. While we look at soil, we look at compaction. Soils get compacted. You and I use the lawns. We do different things with it, and that will compact the soil. That's a hard thing to recover from, but we can. We look at moisture. Now, when was the last average summer? We are in a dry spell right now. Have you noticed the effects on the turf? It's starting to dry up really quickly. We also had a wet summer, which means we had a higher than normal Japanese beetle population. And the Japanese beetle, they're going to affect the quality of your turf because they lay eggs, and the larva is the white grub. And in a recent examination I did on the soil on a turf site, I go and I take a hatchet and I peel back a 12 by 12 area, roll it back, and I count the number of grubs I found. Anything above 15 is considered a concern. I am above 27 in many sites, which means my grub population is high, and what are they eating? Roots. They're living on the roots of your turf. Wet weather in the summer was a benefit to them because the females could get into the ground to lay their eggs so that they would survive. The past several years, what have we had in late June, early July? Dry. So we didn't get them. So next year is going to be what? It's going to be a banner year for Japanese beetle. The following year will depend on what happens next summer during the egg-laying period. So we look at soils, fertility of the soils, we look at, compaction of soils, we look at moisture of the soils, and then we look at what is the real desire? Where do you want to be? Do you want that beautiful Potomac yard that is pristine from the edge of the curb all the way up to the front door and you cannot identify a weed? Or do we want to have the dandelion field where we can go out and we can harvest our salad and then we can go eat? Or do we want something in between? There is no one fix that is going to fit every site on this property. You've got a lot of different things going on. You have pets, you have kids, you've got activities going on. So we're going to look at all of that and play, a little bit of a game on where do we want to go. We also have to recognize things like salt. When you put down de-icer, it's hard on the soil. It's hard on turf. So if we have a hard winter where we're using a lot of salt, the salt runs off and gets onto the soil area, and that degrades the condition of your turf. So we have that. Now, I'm not advocating any one particular solution. I'm not saying let's come in and let's start over, let's hit everything with the strongest chemical possible, end up with bare soil, and then go ahead and replant desired species of turf. But I also want you to look at the other side of that coin. If we do nothing, if we do not control crabgrass, what do you have at the end of December? Crabgrass is a summer annual. Crabgrass will die. So you have a dead field with crabgrass. If we have a derecho type of an event, a heavy rain, what happens to the Potomac River? What happens to the bed? When soil moves, soil carries with it nutrients. And the nutrient we're most concerned with is phosphorus. And we want to be aware that we want to raise a good, high-quality turf. Turf is important to us, aesthetically. We love turf for the aesthetic value. Turf cools. It provides a cooling nature. It also calms us down. Turf provides oxygen. We have about 1.15 million acres of turf in the state of Maryland. That is producing enough oxygen for 80 million people. Good research says that a strong turf prevents runoff. Now, let's look at what's going on in Montgomery County. How many of you follow what goes on with the council? Okay. I got invited unwillingly September 9th to attend the Transportation and Environment Committee work group meeting. Roger Berliner, George Leventhal, Nancy Florine, and some associated aides. What was one of their topics? Is anybody following this in the news? They're considering banning all pesticides on turf in Montgomery County. Okay. One thing we've got to look at is raising a high-quality turf prevents erosion and runoff. Erosion and runoff, I'm not looking at aesthetics. I'm looking at preserving the bed, preserving the Potomac River, preserving all the local streams. So raising a high-quality turf is important. Now, we can get there a lot of different ways. What's the difference between a synthetic chemical, nitrogen fertilizer, and a compost material? What is the real difference to the plant? None. The plant can't tell if it's an organic source or if it's a synthetic source. Where does that synthetic nitrogen come from? Oh, come and pressure, we produce synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. That's where it comes from. Okay, who invented that process? Come on, history buffs. It's invented by one of Hitler's scientists who did it for the idea of producing bombs. The United States recognized, okay, we can use it as a source of producing fertilizers to grow crops. So that's one source. Where does phosphate, P2O5, the second element that's on the fertilizer bag, where does that come from? That's mine. Okay? Now, there's nothing wrong with organic sources. The benefit behind organic sources, they're slow release. You put down a compost material, it's a slow release material. Actually, the state of Maryland, as of yesterday, now requires 20% of all turf fertilizers to contain 20% slow release nitrogen, which can be obtained through using organic products, such as a compost product. So we can top dress with a compost product, and it takes a longer period of time to be released. That's a positive. Now there are some blockout dates. November 16th to March 1st, you cannot apply a nitrogen product, period. So we can't use anything during that window of opportunity. Then if you look at it logically, is grass growing between the middle of November and March 1st on the average yard? Now, the average year, the average yard, the top is slowed down, roots are still growing, but they're not going to benefit from the nutrients. So, if you want to look at it, we've got to know what's in the product. You don't just go buy compost and just use compost. You've got to have a guaranteed analysis. You send the compost away, just like you do a fertilizer analysis, a soil test, and you get an analysis of what's in the compost material. And compost this year may differ from compost last year. And looking at some of your sites, your soil test results, you can't use compost everywhere. Who says? Who says you can't use it? Well, the state of Maryland says you can't use it because you have soils that are high in phosphorus. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of PowerPoint. Okay. Here is one of your soil tests that came in. And as we look at the P level, this is the PFID, fertility index value. And we look at that, and on this soil test, we're in the low range. So, we need a fair amount of phosphorus to benefit that soil to grow the turf well. Now, we have to understand a little bit about chemistry, and I'm not going to bore you with a whole lot, but you need a place for the phosphorus to reside. It has to bond itself someplace. So, when I have phosphorus in the low range, there are bonding sites left on the soil. But, when I get phosphorus that is in the high range, I've lost, or I've used my bonding sites up. Once I reach the high range, optimum, according to Maryland's normal way of doing it, and excessive, it is illegal to apply additional phosphorus in the form of a compost material because the nutrients will be lost. Yes, ma'am?
Is it likewise illegal to apply a synthetic herbicide that contains phosphorus, or does this just relate to compost? Or am I
No, this relates to any source of nutrient. Right, any source of nutrient. The reason I'm bringing compost up is because you've got to know what's in your compost. And if your compost is an animal-based material, it will contain phosphorus. Manure-based composts are typically somewhat high in phosphorus. So we need to make sure we have those analyses before we look at using them. And then we have to look at it site by site. Because you see here, and Randy, tell me, where is this particular site?
Area 2.
What is area 2?
I don't have my map.
Okay, okay, fine. But this site, wherever it is different than the previous one, which is in the low to adequate range. So we need to look at each each individual site carefully. I don't care if we're talking synthetic fertilizer or if we're talking compost material. There are limitations on what you use. We then look at the form of nitrogen that we're going to use. Quick release, slow release. Quick release, I know I put it down, typically in 30 days it's either used up or it's gone. Where did it go if it didn't get used by the plant? Part of it went potentially into the groundwater. Where'd the other part of it go? Back up into the atmosphere. It volatilizes. So we look at two sides of this. And by the way, whatever form of nitrogen you use, there's always the potential of volatilization or leaching into the soil. So we just understand that. Synthetic, organic, doesn't matter. So we start with looking at our soil test and getting a better idea, where am I in the mean? We look at this, a pH of 6.7. Kudos. You want to get your pH where it belongs. pH is often the unmanaged nutrient. I see soils quite often where my pH will be in the low 5s. The problem with that is when pH goes down, nutrients, while they're in the soil, they're unavailable. On top of that, the crop protectants you're using, if you're using synthetic chemicals, they don't work when the pH gets low. Many of our pre-emergent herbicides don't do the job well when pH is real low. So, you've got your pH in a zone that is very, very acceptable. Actually, if anything, it's a tad high. Leave it alone for a year, because we live in an area which is constantly moving back down. But pH needs to be managed on a regular basis, so we constantly look at that. Now, some other things that are up here, we look at the K2O, the potash level. Potash is an unregulated chemical as far as Maryland nutrient management goes. It is not classified as a pollutant, so we are unconcerned with that. Lime is an uncontrolled nutrient, though they are monitoring it just to follow whether people are managing their pH well. They can't do anything. You can apply lime whenever you want. We look at nitrogen and phosphorus, and we look at those and we say, really, you shouldn't apply nutrients to a soil when the ground is frozen, because they can't get into the soil. So we want to look at timing and how we do timing. As we look at it, we look at the predominant species of turf. In this case, we're looking at tall fescue. Okay? That's fine. None of our soils, none of our turfs are monocultures. You don't want a single species. You want a multitude of species. Now, I mentioned crabgrass earlier. What's wrong with crabgrass? Really, what's wrong with crabgrass? It's an annual. I'm not even getting into the aesthetic value. Some people just don't like it. It's not as pretty as other turf species. I'm looking at the fact that it dies. And it leaves the soil much more prone to the potential of soil erosion. You know, you can have a crabgrass covered field, and when you have a hard cold winter, lots of snow, and you get the quick thaws, and the snow melts, and you get a lot of moisture running, you got a much greater potential for erosion. So we just want to look at that, and we want to get some desired species of turf in there that are going to help hold that soil year-round. I could say, go zoysium, go Bermuda grass. And some of you would probably carry me out quicker for mentioning those than saying, let's go synthetic chemicals. Because there are people that just hate warm season grasses. But by the way, University of Maryland Stadium was a warm season grass until a year ago when Kevin Plank decided he was going to modify that field. And it is now artificial, unfortunately. So we look at those two prime nutrients that are the key players in growing high-quality turf. Now, nitrogen's not up there. Why is nitrogen not on your soil test? Nitrogen can't get measured. We can't give you a really good measurement of nitrogen on a soil test because so many factors affect whether it's going to be there today or not be there tomorrow. So we know that grass requires between 2.5 2.5 and 3 pounds of actual nitrogen fertilizer per 1,000 square foot of turf area. So, it's pretty easy to figure out how much fertilizer you need in the way of nitrogen, whether it be organic or synthetic. The thing we have to look at is you're never allowed, according to the new law, to apply more than 0.9 pounds in any single application. 0.7 pounds can be immediate release. The additional 0.2 pounds, or 20%, will be slow release from whatever form you want to use. You can go solely organic. When you go solely organic, I want you to think about this. When we use organic matter, you end up, what you do is you top dress. You go through and you will basically take a very finely ground compost material and you put it on an 1/8 to 1/4 inch thick. It will break down slowly over time. This is what we do at golf courses, and we top dress golf courses. And we will allow those nutrients to break down and move into the soil profile and benefit the turf species that you have growing. Now, how do you get good weed control? What were some of us taught? How have we maintained high quality turf? Who are my golf course people? Who plays golf? Well, I mean, golfers here? I've played 4 times in my life. I'm really experienced. Mow tall. That is one way. We recommend mowing heights between 2.5 and 3.5 inches high. So that's a benefit. Getting your turf to a desired height, because what that does is it helps shade the soil and it makes it tough for weed seed to germinate. Okay? What's another way we grow high quality turf? What do they do in the fall and sometimes in the spring at the golf course? They make it ugly for it.
Aerate.
They aerate it. You're helping fight the compaction. You're opening the soil up. You can take the plugs away and backfill with compost, or you can leave the plugs there and take a drag over it and break the plugs up so that they will slowly filter back into the soil. You've loosened the upper surface so that you allow moisture and nutrients to move into the soil. You can overseed at the same time. So we've got mowing, we've got core aeration, we apply appropriate irrigation. That's not always possible, is it? Irrigation to me is probably the most misunderstood and over-managed component we have in turf. People want to water too often. I want you to water less, but deeper. Get the profile wet several inches and then stop and leave it alone. Let the profile start to dry down. So, and then we look at, okay, we can use the overseeding process. That's fine. That does a nice job. But you've got to have the nutrients in the soil at an available form and rate where they can be utilized by the plant. For seed, germination, and early growth, we need phosphorus. We're low in this case, so we need to make sure we add some additional phosphorus. The other site we were in the high range, but when we seed, we want to make sure we put down a little bit of phosphorus to help give it a boost so it's immediately available to the germinating seed and it kicks off and grows. How do you control crabgrass? You live in the crabgrass belt. So how am I going to cope with it? Well, one method that is often recommended is corn gluten. Have we heard of corn gluten?
Yes.
Okay, what are your feelings about corn gluten? How many of you like it? How many of you don't like it? Okay, 2 things you need to know. Corn gluten works fantastic. It is a great weed preventer in a greenhouse where I can carefully control the water that moves through it. When I take it and I stick it outside on your yard, right here, I'm now subjected to what Mother Nature's going to throw at me. If I have a dry spring, it does nothing. If I have an average spring, it works fine. If I have a wet spring, it does nothing. Well, it actually gets worse. If I have a wet spring, it becomes nitrogen fertilizer and you mow more often. So, corn gluten has been shown to have effect, but it is not replicated. I can't replicate it on a regular basis across a lot of yards year after year. So it doesn't always give us, and actually our turf guys say we can get good results with it 20 to 25% of the time. This year it would have failed. It literally would have washed out. But by the way, a lot of our synthetic chemicals also failed. Why? They washed away. We had more rain this spring, we had more rain during the summer growing months, the turf growing months, than we typically get for the whole year. Now, we look at, that fact and, okay, let's hope this isn't a normal year. In a lot of ways, let's hope. In other ways, tomorrow night, Friday night, I'll be doing my other job. I will change my hat and I will not be an educator Friday night. I will be sitting in a seat. Who has a really nice car? Who has a really nice car? Come on, who's got the really nice car? I'm going to be sitting in my really nice vehicle on Friday night. And I bet you my vehicle costs more than your vehicle because mine's over $300,000 and we use it for 6 weeks a year. It's called a combo. So I'll be harvesting corn Friday night, Saturday night, all day Sunday, and then if I can afford to take off next week. But we're seeing record corn yields. We had a lot of moisture. But that's not normal in this area. If you follow the climate change model and you look at what's going on with climate change, one of the big things, do we live in an area that on the average year is seeing less moisture over the year or more moisture over the year? This is real important as you look at turf and how you fertilize turf and how you use weed killers on turf. So what are we getting? Less moisture on the average year, not this summer, or less moisture on the average year, not even talking about this summer.
According to the Post, it's about the same.
We're getting a little bit more every year. The problem is, in the summer months, it comes like the derecho. Think of the derecho of a year ago. Do you know we had another rain event this summer, 1 week earlier than last summer's derecho? It brought a tornado through the Dickerson White's Ferry area. The same farmers that got nailed last summer got nailed this summer and couldn't get out in fields for 2 weeks because of downed trees, things like that, like orchard growers. So we look at things like that and we pay attention to moisture because as we look at some of the ways we can control crabgrass, we can use products like Dimension. We can put out crabgrass, stilt grass, and goosegrass preventative pre-emergent products that will not allow the annual weeds to germinate if we put them out properly, get them out timely. But if we have too much rain, they literally get diluted. By the way, so does corn gluten. So is there necessarily one solution that fits everything? There isn't. How do you control weeds in a landscape? How do you control weeds in cracks and crevices? Why do we care about weeds in cracks and crevices? Randy, why is that clause in your contract with your maintenance people? Why do we care about that?
Because it continues to grow the walkways.
It looks bad?
Yep.
What about personal safety? What about some of our senior citizens that really don't pick their feet up like they should, and they kind of shuffle, and they hit that clump in the ground, in the sidewalk, and then they fall. So we want to control it. The less you control it, the greater the possibility of the roots grow and grow and grow. Then when you have a cold winter, the moisture gets down there, and then it freezes, and then you have an eruption of the concrete. So, there's reasons to control weeds. How do you control it? How are you going to handle weeds outside of turf? You've got a laundry list of things you can use. You can go out there with propane and you can flame them. Seriously, it can be done. Be careful on your concrete though, because if you hold the flame too long on the concrete, What happens to your concrete? It pops. Anybody that's ever welded and put metal on the floor and welded on the floor knows what I'm talking about. We can use, we can use vinegar. We can use the, I'm pulling a blank, burnout product. 20 grain vinegar, and we can utilize that. That works for annual weeds. It doesn't touch my perennial weeds. I did research on that for 2.5 years. It's a great product. I use it right underneath brambles, won't affect the brambles. So, you have that option. Start to look at expense though, because you have to balance this, because it is an expensive product. Commercial 20 grain vinegar costs $125 per 55-gallon drum. When you buy it in the ready-to-use form from St. Gabriel's Lab, it costs somewhere in the $60 to $70 per quart. Okay? You've got to use legal vinegar. You just can't go by, I use kosher vinegar from Bushman's Vinegar in Baltimore. But I'm a researcher, so I'm allowed to take things that are not readily on the market. Burnout was not available on the market at the time. So I did some of the research that showed it had purpose. You can use a wide array of synthetic chemicals. You got to look at cost and effect. How often do people have to come back? What is the lasting effect of the product? So there's a lot of different things you pay attention to. Compost tea. What is compost tea? We talk about it. People. One of my good friends, Pogo. You ever heard of Pogo?
Yeah.
Pogo tree experts. You have to meet Pogo. Who's met Pogo? You have to meet Pogo, don't you? He is a character. Pogo is a character. There's nobody that knows compost better than Pogo. He can make better compost than my university specialist in compost. Actually, our university specialist quit and went to work for Pogo. So, nobody makes better compost than Pogo does. Pogo also sold compost tea. You could go to different stores in Montgomery County and buy compost tea. He loved it because good compost tea has value. The problem is keeping good compost tea good. It has a very short shelf life, extremely short shelf life. And a day like today, October 2nd, someone told me it hit 85 degrees today, in the trunk of your car, it's good for about 5 minutes. And then it's dead because it got too hot. You have to keep it oxygenated. Compost tea is best used when it's initially made. Make it, use it. What's in it? Is this snake oil? Is it really something that has value? Does compost have value? Definitely. Compost has value. I'm a vegetable producer. I use compost. I use manures. They all have value. Compost tea is where I take compost material and I put it in a non-city water container, and basically I extract the microbes and the dilutable nutrients, the water-soluble nutrients out of the compost, and I put it in the water. Then I take those and I take it out and I apply it. Now, compost made today can be very different from compost made next week. So the tea will be very different. The types of microbes, the amounts of microbes, they will vary. So it's not a given that compost tea is able to be replicated week after week after week. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We want to build soil microbes. How do we kill soil microbes? Heat, compaction, too much traffic. Yes, some chemicals will change, some synthetic chemicals will change the microbes in the soil. Microbes are really good though. They do regenerate. They do regenerate fairly quickly. I like to see a soil that's alive. I was a high school teacher for too many years. And I used to go to the water fountain. I used to take a sample of water out of the water spigot. And I'd stick it underneath the microscope. And I'd show the kids in class there's stuff alive in their water. And they get all, ugh. there's stuff alive in the soil, and that's what you want. You want good live soil. Composting can benefit it. It's getting it out over a large area well. Because if your guy arrives at 8 o'clock in the morning with a fresh batch of compost tea, and it's sitting in a truck with a tank that's exposed to the sunlight, or that can heat up, or is going to go through a black hose that got hot because he sat and ate his lunch, and the hose got real hot during lunch, then you lose the effect of the compost tea. So, it can be done. It has been done. We've shown in research it works. But it's getting it done on a large scale. Now, if each of you were to do your own compost tea at home, and you would apply it to your own yard, wow. But getting it done wholesale to all of your medians, all your common areas, that becomes a challenge to the person that's going to offer to do it. You got to hold them accountable to use the stuff well. Can it really do anything harmful? No. But it's not cheap. And if you don't use it well, all you put out is colored water, dirty water. So you've got to look at the balance of that. And you've got to put it out in a fashion where you're going to get the best bang for your dollar and where you want to be with your HOA fees and the quality of your turf. Now, I talked crabgrass. I talked a little bit about dandelions. Do we need a turf that is totally free of every possible weed? Okay, good. We don't need to be there. Understand something. If you throw the switch and you're going to go totally organic, you need to make a commitment of 5 years. And you will not look back, and you will not call me up and curse me out. I have had this happen. I did it last year with an HOA in Bethesda. They went totally green. They went totally natural. Landscape company said, okay, we'll do it, but understand that. I said, listen to them. They're right. Because the first thing that's going to happen is the first year, maybe 2 years, every weed seed that's in that soil profile is going to germinate. And your turf is going to look really, really rough. Then we start to rebuild and we start to get it to return. You'll never be totally weed-free, but you have to decide where you want to be in that. You've got to decide where. They called me in June. What did you do to us? Lesser celandine, Japanese stilk grass, goose grass, Dallas grass. They're back on chemicals. They just would not accept it. And their biggest argument with me was that Roundup was killing their dogs. Okay, glyphosate products was killing their dogs. I truly can't find the link there. But, in another HOA community 8 years ago, I also got blamed for a dog dying and a kid's SAT scores dropping by. I got yelled at for quite a while. They put milky sport in. And the dog died the very next day, and there is absolutely no relationship. But if you look on the internet long enough and hard enough, guess what you can find? Some relationship. So you got to make sure you pick good, viable, reliable sources if you're going to come yell at me. Because I will tell you this, I did decide today, if anybody yells at me anymore this week, I'm done, I'm retiring. 32 years as of yesterday. And I will retire. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, did the soil test you did test for microbial life?
No, because there's really no good way of doing that the way we do our soil tests. To look at microbial action, you've got to you have to take that moist soil, and the soils lab that does nutrient analysis wants dry soil. And you've got to run it immediately. So you've got to basically hand carry it to the lab and have them run it immediately. And there's so many factors. I mean, literally, from here to you, it can be very different. It can be very different based upon the quality of the soil, what organic matter washed there, where somebody parked and washed their car with a laundry detergent and it damaged. There's so many factors that vary in that. we can look at plant life and we can tell a lot about how healthy a soil is. So I don't necessarily need to run special analysis to tell me if a soil is nice and healthy. You know, I look at things like pH, I look at organic matter. These are good indicators of a high quality soil, because when I've got organic matter, I'm typically going to have microbes, because otherwise, the sticks, leaves, grass blades, they don't break down, they just sit there. And I think we all agree that that occurs in a majority of our soils here. You'll find some occasionally don't. Yes, ma'am.
So you were talking about turf, and I understand that we have a lot of turf here, but one of the things in educating myself, I've learned a lot about what are alternative, like conservation gardening, or what are rainscape gardens that are actually, there are monies that are available to do that kind of gardening, and it's minimizing what is water usage, and in turn using native plants and grasses. Is there no such thing as a native grass that could be similar to a turf look, or in turn maybe even looking at the areas and saying maybe there's a difference in, you don't need turf, but maybe something else that is more, what the conservation gardening and what the rainscape gardening is all about, which is really using your native grasses and your native plants.
We have natives. Natives don't like to be mowed. When I start mowing them down to heights that many people will feel are acceptable, then we have a tendency of killing them off. I was at a different HOA 3 weeks ago, and we were discussing pond issues there. And they have a pond that is green with algae. And why was it green with algae? It was green with algae because of all the synthetic fertilizers we were using. It was green with algae because of the oversized mowers. It was green with algae because, let me see, what was the other? All the herbicides we were using. So, well, we were using a lot of herbicides. Nothing's going to grow in that pond, including algae. We have natives. The problem is they like to be about a foot tall. What's the county limit? I think it's 8. I think it's 8. Isn't it 8, Randy, where they will come in and they will start to mow and then they will bill you? So we have to, yes, there are natives, but they need to grow taller. Then when we start to grow taller grasses, here's where we get into a problem. Germantown has the unfortunate, what's the right word? It is known now for the fact that it has one of the higher levels of Lyme disease. Where's Lyme disease coming from? Germantown. Deer, and what's the little critter that's transported? The mice. When you have tall grass, you potentially have that. So, it's not that I'm against it. Can we go to certain areas and can we let them grow? I have no problem with that. That doesn't become my decision. That becomes a decision of the group, and they have to decide, okay, what is acceptable? How tall will we allow? Rainscapes are awesome. The more we hold moisture locally, the better off we're going to be. We slowly let it percolate back into the ground. It doesn't all need to race to the Potomac River. That becomes a decision of what does the masses want? What is acceptable to the county government? What is acceptable to the HOAs? Things like that. I will tell you, I have seen yards that were being maintained as native grasses. They were beautiful, and they also had a patch or a placard placed on the front gate, and the county was coming 7 days later to mow it down because it was unacceptable to the county. So that becomes a re-education process we have to do with government. So there's a lot of things we can do to decrease mowing, but it has to be something that everyone's going to buy into. I understand your point. I get home too late many nights of the week, so my lawn does not look. I do not have the landscape dream of a yard. So I have what I have.
I'm not really talking about like turf equivalent, because now I understand what you're saying. I'm saying that there are rainscape gardens that can be made, or conservation type gardening landscape that has a different look than what is the turf in some of the areas that
Sure,
are
the
next
common
to the
areas.
road, that, and, you know, maybe this area is a different area because it's a common area that is
Well,
used for a different
I'm
purpose.
gonna,
But
I think
but
I got.
the point being is that there are a lot of other alternatives that need to be thought of
Sure,
as well.
but if
And
you
when
were to
talk
take-
about turf,
You've got the
Here.
one avenue going down, and I believe it's right down here, where it's got a median strip in it, and you've got street trees in it, okay?
Yeah.
You could take an area like that and not manage the turf the way you're managing it. And you could allow it to grow up. And then you could then take that, and that could be natives, it could be a rainscape. Actually, there was a big thing about a week ago about taking certain turf sites, or certain parking lot sites, and turning them into parking lot parks. And they were putting them right next to the storm drains so that you would slow the movement of street water as it moves towards storm drains. Yes, there's a lot of options we can do. We don't have to maintain as much turf as we have. We can turn them into larger landscapes. That's not an area that I can say, you gotta do this or you gotta do that. That becomes the desire of where the body wants to go. I mean, there are many really neat recommendations on how you can do that. Stanton Gill, how many of you know Stanton? Oh, I'm sorry, you don't know Stanton. Stanton Gill is our entomologist. He is the other ornamental horticulturist west of the Bay. That is a field educator for extension. He's a state specialist. And his yard has no grass. It's all shrubbery. I mean, literally, there is not a blade of grass to use a weed eater even on. But that's got, you know, that's a different setting. He worries about trees falling on his house because he has trees all the way up next to his house. Now, it never has happened. But, you know, that's his concern as he looks at as the trees as they mature. But, you know, we can take median strip areas and we can take them from being grass and we can grow something else there. That is a viable option. You look at very similar things. What is the soil like? What's the fertility like? What do you want to raise? What does the plant material need? How do I get there? So how can I raise that so that I have a high quality plant material that's going to absorb more moisture, require less labor, be aesthetically pleasing, and the big thing is not going to be a security issue so that you can't see, the police can't see across, things like that. So it can't be allowed to grow too tall. Those are things that I've learned over the years that, you know, communities want to look at. They want to be able to look at, you know, the police officer who drives down the street, he wants to be able to look across the median strip and be able to see as much as possible. We defeat that sometimes ourselves with the shrubbery we put around our own homes, right? The fences, we line them with shrubbery, we put our screens up, things like that.
So Chuck, if you were going to suggest sort of a, you know, a nice balance here of we want the common areas to be maintained in a way that they are good for use, for walking, for playing on, for all of that, and we are looking at our lawn care program. The building blocks of it are going to be what? There's going to be aeration, right?
Correct. Aeration is an important
Twice
tool.
a year, right? Aeration's going to be huge. We're going to look at what we need to put nutrients in the soil and what the different issues are in different areas, right?
Mhm.
We're going to mow.
Soil test,
We're going to
mow
mow it out
appropriately.
appropriately. We're going to try to reduce the weeds in some different ways. And what else should we be doing?
Well, looking at things holistically, looking at putting plant material where plant material will thrive the best. You know, let's just back up. We're going to control weeds. How are we going to control weeds? Let's look at all the possibilities and not start first with a synthetic chemical. So we start at the bottom. pH, appropriate mowing height, appropriate nutrients. When we talk mowing height, let's also talk sharp blades. Appropriate nutrients.
Can we talk mulching mowers too? Is it better?
Grass cycling is the key to growing healthy turf and decreasing costs. Grass cycling, first off, why do you want to send it to the landfill? If you're old enough, I remember there's very rarely an occasion my father wanted to capture grass and send it away. My father was not an ecology person. My father was a civil engineer. He knew little to nothing about growing good grass. If it was green and it was zoysia, he was happy. Okay? That was the bottom line. But occasionally we would bag the grass up. We would put it in plastic bags. You ever smell what's inside of a plastic bag after a week? Well, no, it's not composting because we took the oxygen away. We now have silage. Ah, that stinky stuff silage. Okay, what happens when it goes to the landfill and gets packed down? It never decays away. Most of your counties now want you to at least take it through the recycling program where it becomes the next layer mulch. Just a second, I will call it. But mulching mowers, where I put the clippings back, where I remove no more than 1/3 of the upper plant material in one cutting, so I need to mow often at times. Some thatch is good. Some thatch allows a layer of thatch will help keep the soil cooler, the soil damper, and it breaks down into more nutrients. So there's nothing wrong with that. I never capture grass, ever. But I do mow. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know, is it a requirement in Montgomery County, or is it a typical practice that the landscapers do deposit the clippings into the Montgomery County recycling for mulching?
Most clippings in Montgomery County do not make it to your landfill.
When you say landfill, that's separate from recycling into.
Well, even
Right.
they don't go to a county site, period.
That's what I was thinking. Where do they go? Do you know?
Pogo. Seriously, one of the things Pogo does is Pogo offers roll-off dumpsters to the landscapers, and the landscapers put all of their landscape and turf waste into the dumpster. He hauls it over up to New Hampshire Avenue, and he makes compost.
Is Pogo concerned about clippings that have been treated, like the Let's Go Three-Way herbicide that's used in our neighborhood? It specifically says not to use clippings as mulch material around fruit and vegetable plants.
Okay. Three-way I don't worry about. Three-way breaks down pretty quickly.
Then why is that on the EPA use label?
Because if I take the fresh grass clippings and use them in the garden, and they haven't had a chance to break down, there's a concern. Tomatoes are your best indicator. If you really want to find out if a chemical's bad, tomatoes or grapes. They're the two. I keep tomato seeds in my office specifically to test compost for chemicals. And I will start a tomato, I'll grow it for a week, and then I'll put the compost around it, and if the plant quickly dies, okay, then I have a problem. Milestone, pluralid, there's a couple others.
Question, what if it's not that it's going to kill that plant, but that it makes it somehow contaminated? And I thought that was the concern in my mind, not the fact that it would harm, in an acute, immediate way, your plant. I was thinking perhaps that would just make the vegetable or fruit be contaminated with the chemical.
Well, two of the products that are typically in three-way are 2,4-D, one of the most popular long-term plant growth regulators we've used since World War II. And I will stop right there. Please understand, 2,4-D was not, never was, is not part of Agent Orange. Okay? 2,4-D is separate from the product that was in Agent Orange, which was 2,4,5-TP. Years ago, we called that Silvax. Okay? It's not part of what's in the market now at all. Silvax went off the market in the early 70s. 2,4-D, one of the other products that's typically in there is Banfill. Okay? Both of these are pretty quick to break down products in the environment. So we use them in many, many different ways. So they are a commonly used broadleaf weed killer, and we like to use more than one chemical, so we try to prevent some of the resistance issues that Roundup is coming up with. Roundup is now being laughed at by goldenrod of all things. They will vary the third chemical, and in fact we've started to pull some of the third chemicals out, some of the different products that were being used, as we found there were some potential health-related issues with some of those third chemicals. And we're continuing to modify what is available in three-way, and and other products. And some of the old products of old may have contained some products that now are being shown to have some longer-term reactivity. But overall, I don't have a problem with that chemical as much as I do with some of the others. I'll tell you, this year I've had more issues with products like three-way not staying in the turf, but literally volatilizing and going into the air and damaging landscapes. We had some really odd weather conditions that allowed Banville to volatilize and go into the air, move short distances and land on trees. It was just a really odd year for that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did, but I'm just surprised, given the amount of research that I've been able to find on 2,4-D, that there would be so many studies on 2,4-D, like epidemiological and lab studies, if it breaks down that quickly. Like, I guess I'm skeptical about we thought that 2,4-D does not stay in the ground or the groundwater, or somehow people are getting exposed to it because there is a lot of research out there about 2,4-D and the health impacts.
Well, 2,4-D is one of the most heavily researched herbicides over the last, gosh, we've even passed 50 years now for it. The most research is atrazine. And atrazine we find in Chesapeake Bay. Not a disagreement with that whatsoever. It is what we classify as a legacy herbicide. It bonds the soil, it will stay there for long periods of time. 2,4-D, we're not finding, in fact, 2,4-D has a tendency of not staying in the soil, not really going into the water, but going into the air.
So maybe that's how people are getting exposed.
It volatilizes rather quickly. I will tell you that people that have used it in the industry, heavy users, we're not seeing any particular health implications there when they use appropriate protection, and that's always a critical point. If they use the proper protective equipment when they do the job, and I know some landscapers don't. I know a lot of homeowners that don't. People just don't read the label. It is not a legacy product where it will stay long. Actually, the label calls for you as a homeowner to be able to go back on that turf site when the product is dry. Whereas for the applicator, we have a longer window of re-entry with that protective gear because we use it so often.
Chuck, I think we're going to need to wrap this up a little bit.
Okay.
So I've got a couple of questions, and if anyone else has questions, please jump in. One is, I think, what's a realistic expectation here? Because one of the things that became clear to me when we walked around the neighborhood with Chuck is just there are a lot of very difficult conditions in this neighborhood, and having sort of perfect grass is, to my mind, not possible under any conditions. So the question then becomes, what's a good place to want to be? And in some cases, I think in some of the median strips, we're going to have a different understanding of how they can look, especially small curb strips that get beaten up so much. I think we're going to have one understanding of what's possible there and a different kind of understanding of what can be achieved in some other areas.
That would be appropriate. The smaller the area, especially when you've got street trees right near them, it's difficult to put a lot of herbicides down and try to maintain that perfectly. Because remember, the tree is stealing moisture, so it's making it tough for the turf to grow. So we have to balance that. Okay, is it worth applying herbicides in places like that? You look at your field areas where your kids play on a regular basis. What do you want there? We want safety because we don't want clumpy areas because that's where kids trip and that's where you end up with a lot of the injury-related things. But do you need to be going out there, once a week, trying to control every weed possible? There has to be a balance you look at. Then you might have areas, your entranceways, that you say, this is the area I want to say, wow, that's the area people are going to look at. Yeah, I like that. I've got shrubbery, I've got annual flowers, I've got turf that really sets up and says, I'm really a nice neighborhood. But it doesn't mean everybody's yard, every median strip, has to be identical. Now you had a question.
Well, you kind of took the sail out of my, wind out of my sail here.
Sorry.
But I came from Potomac and took care of my yard for years and downsized and came in here, and I have a front, you know, 20 by 20 feet by 5 feet, 10 feet, whatever, and I have 6 neighbors with that same plan, plus some sycamores and some evergreens. I don't see myself putting all what you've recommended tonight in my garage to sprinkle that little area there.
Right.
So what is the practical solution to this? Do we get our neighbors together and bring sample to you and say, hey, you know?
Well, the first thing you do, you start with a good soil test. You put your pH where it belongs, because if pH isn't where it belongs, nothing's going to work, whether it's synthetic or whether it's organic, period. You get pH up where it's going to be. You use nutrients that are going to provide the need for the plant, whether synthetic or organic. And then you try to mow tall and maintain a dense turf. You can use patch products when you end up with bald spots, but you're underneath sycamore trees. That becomes a difficulty because the sycamore extracts so much moisture. So maybe you look at using ground covers that are not going to require the maintenance that the turf does, and are going to, you know, work well with the sycamore tree or whatever trees you have there. Turf, it doesn't grow deep. You know, we're looking 3 to 4 inches is where the root system is. So that's where the sycamore has extracted all the moisture. But if I can get something that will grow deeper, like a blue rug juniper, a sedum, they will maintain a really nice color, order, suppress weeds, and you don't have to have the turf.
Will a Pachysandra do well there?
Pachysandra is a shallower rooter than sedums are really good. Pachysandra is a little bit of a closer to the surface rooting plant.
I just wanted to ask if it's realistic to maybe have an assessment like the one that you have done already, to have different areas of Kentlands, and then have a report out that says, you know, this is the map, you belong to area 1, this is the quality of your soil, and this is the recommendation. If you want to go organic, like, these are the choices that you have. And that's aside from the common areas, of course, that, you know, somebody decided by the group, but as homeowners, I think we are also concerned about what to do, and some of us have smaller lawns, some of us have bigger ones, and like the gentleman actually mentioned, you know, we want to know what are the recommendations also for homeowners, not just the common areas.
When we look at this area, the problem is, this area, you might be on the other side of the fence from this area, but because that's yours, and you have managed it, you may not have applied lime, so your pH may not be where it needs to be for the best soil growth. So really, I need to look at your soil test on your side of the fence, because I can't always compare it to what's on the common area side of the fence. Am I mistaken, Randy? Because the homeowner is responsible for their own plot.
Correct. And
Okay.
that particular chart is from this area right up here.
Okay.
So Chuck, if individual homeowners want to have their own soil tested, how do you recommend they go about that?
hgic.umd.edu. That's the Home and Garden Information Center. And on their website, at the top of the page, is soil testing. It takes you to a tab that shows you the soil test labs that are approved by the state of Maryland. It's not that we have a cut on it. They need to look and understand testing Maryland soils. They need to either use the Bray or the mail-it-free chemical extraction method. They're the hgic.umd.edu. That will take you to a web page for the Home and Garden Information Center. On the top, just about middle, is a tab saying soil testing. You click on that and it'll take you to the choices of regional labs. You can run your own soil test. It costs you between $9 and $15. It's a good resource. It's really neat to see what your soil's all about. And then get that. You can have an email, usually 6 to 10 days, doesn't take long. Share it with me and I'll help you understand what to do with it. Yes?
I I thought I was downsizing with costs and problems when I got here to this community. I just want to point out something that you brought up near the beginning of your lecture, and that is we started to have brown spots in our backyard. Now this is all of 20 by 40 reduced by planting beds and a patio. Okay, so it's not a big deal, but we started to have brown spots. And when I went to the garden center and conversed with their expert there, we decided it was brown spots. Okay, and I paid $25 for a solution, brought it home, and never got to it. Now we went from August to September, all right? And in September, we started to have these caverns dug in our backyard.
You know what they're from?
I think so, okay? And, you know, so we did our best to educate ourselves in this, figured out it was grubs, and figured out it was raccoons going for this. And now I'm up to $450 to get rid of the raccoons.
What are you doing to the raccoons?
I'm getting rid of the raccoons because I've got potholes all over that backyard.
They could be voles too.
Bowls?
Voles, V-O-L-E-S.
Yeah, I saw one in a cage, it wasn't a bowl.
Okay, so you're catching the babies, okay.
One, but he's got mates and cousins.
A friend of mine did that. It started 3 weeks ago. He thought he had 2 or 3 raccoons. He's up to 17.
I'm going to start sharing something with the community then.
Chuck, I might suggest maybe we can close the
Sure.
general.
And I can hang around and
And
answer
Chuck can
specific.
hang around and
Do you have a general question?
Well, we had 10 of our sites that are taken care of by the community. And we had soil tests.
Right, and I have-
You showed a couple of them.
Yes.
Now, you gave us a lecture a while back about pH. It looked like our pH is in pretty good shape.
Yes, I was real close.
So we were hoping for a silver bullet in the form of lime, and apparently that's not the only answer.
No, unfortunately.
What can you see just from looking at this?
Well, the neat thing is, from site to site, you look at your
Varies.
phosphate, it varies. So you got to fertilize to the phosphate level, and then make sure you put out adequate nitrogen. Especially as we move into the new law, your group that fertilizes for you has to have a license. And by the way, all of you homeowners, the law applies to you now. So you can't over fertilize, or your neighbors. We've got this happening in Frederick County already. Neighbors are turning neighbors in for applying too much fertilizer. Maryland Department of Environment, the Montgomery County Department of Environment is the agency in Montgomery County that is enforcing the fertilizer law for Montgomery. Okay, so there is no one solution.
That concern is for phosphate runoff.
Phosphate and nitrogen.
Question, we know that they need an applicator's license, and it's just for like the crew manager, is that correct? Like the people applying, they don't need the license?
They have to be trained and they have to have a technician's license.
Okay, so everyone applying in our neighborhood, in any form, like as far as the landscaper, subcontractor, or whatever, they need to have been, what did you say it again?
Well,
Certified?
they have to be certified. They have to go through a training. Now, the license you're probably talking about is pesticides. But did you know that there's a new license to apply fertilizer? You have to have a manure spreader license, that's what we're calling it in the office. You have to have a fertilizer applicator license. MDA is not going to start enforcing that rule. It went into effect yesterday. And the reason MDA is not enforcing it is because MDA goofed. Their test was supposed to be available December 1st, 2012. It was available July 1st, 2013. I am license holder number 1.
Will the applicators likewise need to be certified for fertilizer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and if a fertilizer contains any kind of pesticide, then they have to have the pesticide certification anyway.
They have to be, someone in the company has to have a pesticide license, and then the people under them have to have been trained. They're techs.
Do you know what the requirements for training are? Is it
2
written?
hours of training.
Is it 2 hours of training? Is it oral? Is it written? Is it?
There's no written test. I just came back from a national meeting in which I picked up some Spanish training modules to be utilizing with some of my Latino crews, because I go out and I do a lot of trainings. I do tailgate trainings, and they'll have me out, and I'll go out there and I'll do a couple sessions with them at the end of their day. MDA is pretty strict on this. Our local guy, his name is Yapa, and he is extremely tough. You better have the records for having it done. Okay, why don't we close it up? I'll stay so that the bulk can leave. and I'll be glad to entertain one-on-one questions.
Thank you.